My name is Don Dix. I'm a talk radio show host, and I love this state and country, and I'm doing everything I can to help save it. In the second week of May, the California State Board of Education enacted a controversial framework that will have a major impact in the state's public education. A controversial curriculum that mandates comprehensive sex education and teaching on gender theory. The no-holds-barred K-12 health curriculum teaches children as young as kindergarten about gender identity issues and talks explicitly with high school students about every imaginable sex act.
My name is Tim Thompson. I'm the senior pastor of 412 Church in Murrieta. Murrieta is a small town in Southern California, but even though we're in California, we still share a lot of the same values that Middle America does. This is a small town feel. It's a family environment. Many people are churchgoers, conservatives. It's a horse community. It's got the wine country out here. It's just a beautiful place to live. When we first started digging into this, we thought, man, this is right here. This is local. Then we found it was countywide. Then we found it was statewide. And here's what we know. This is a national emergency. This is not just here in California. This is all over the nation. Let me be clear. This is not anti-LGBT. This is pro-parental rights. That's what this is all about. Many gays, many lesbians have come out and said, we are with you. We don't want this stuff being taught to children either. It doesn't just affect the Christians here in California or America. This affects you if you're a Muslim. It affects you if you're a same-sex couple. This affects every parent. We don't want our children exposed to some of these things that they're showing, this pornographic, sexually explicit material, and it has no place in the classroom. It's not right, and it won't be tolerated.
My name is Netta Higuera. I'm an attorney at Tyler & Bursch LLP in Murrieta, California, and we have a nonprofit as well, Advocates for Faith and Freedom, where we represent clients on issues of parental rights and religious liberty. I started hearing just some buzz with parents and some pastors about what's going on in our schools with sex ed. In our office, we had several parents call telling us what their kids are being taught. We started to investigate and try to uncover what's going on.
I got together with a guy named John Andrews. He goes to my church, and I gave him some very specific parameters. I said, I want you to look at issues of life. I want you to look at issues of marriage, issues of sexuality, issues that have an impact on the culture for the Lord.
My name is John Andrews. I'm a husband, a father, and a member of 412 Church in Murrieta. I was reading stories in the news of controversial sex ed programs being introduced to kids, specifically in California. And I, like any other concerned parent, decided to pick up the phone and sort of ask questions as to what was going on in my school district. I was able to get in touch with the right people. I spoke with the director of curriculum. I had questions regarding a couple different controversial topics that we're hearing about a lot. They had explained to me that they were just meeting the requirements of the law to teach on gender identity or transgenderism or whatever it is, and that's required of them in AB 329. But things went south when we got a copy of Positive Prevention Plus sex ed curriculum, the curriculum that they were teaching to our junior high and high school kids. Yeah, that's when things changed. And when we saw the illustrations and some of the support material that's provided in Positive Prevention Plus, some of the websites and the books that they recommend to support what's being taught to our kids, it's pornographic. They talk about anal and oral sex as an alternative to regular sex because you can't get pregnant. They talk about mutual masturbation. They discuss gender roles, the gender spectrum, and in the support material, which is provided to teachers and students to accompany the curriculum, they take it even further. They discuss everything, topics like role playing for different genders, blood play, dental dams. I don't even know what dental dams is. I had to look that up. Fisting is mentioned. I mean, they mention it all, and it absolutely has no place in a sex ed program for kids. If I were to show that material to a child, I'd be brought up on charges. But somehow, our public schools are allowed to teach this to junior high and high school kids. I couldn't believe sex ed looked like this.
Well, John started calling the local school districts, and he found out one of the districts was getting ready to release a sex ed curriculum to the parents.
During this dialogue, they had mentioned that there was an event coming up and that I should probably attend. It was the rollout of the sex ed curriculum program. A sex ed rollout is really when a district presents the curriculum to the parents. It's sort of an introduction as to what's going to be taught to your children. And at the end, there was a brief Q&A.
Roughly 20 parents show up to a meeting like this. And so I set out to change those odds. And I called all the pastors in the valley that I knew, and I said, we need to get our congregations out to hear what is going to be taught to our children as it pertains to sexuality. When we showed up, we started to flood in. And it really overwhelmed them because they started pulling chairs out from all over the place, trying to accommodate the sheer numbers of people that were showing up. We wanted to ensure that this pornographic, sexually explicit material wasn't going to be taught to our children. So what we did was we got together with a law firm, Advocates for Faith and Freedom. We prepared a policy that we could give to the school board in Marietta to ensure that advance notice would be given to parents and our parental rights to pull our kids out if we didn't feel this stuff was appropriate would still be ensured.
I'm Robert Tyler. I am managing partner at Tyler & Bursch, a law firm, and also president of Advocates for Faith and Freedom, a nonprofit, public interest law firm that serves to protect our religious liberties and First Amendment rights. We've worked with allied organizations in order to come up with a policy that we think school boards should be adopting, a policy that would protect parental rights and also to protect kids. Frankly, the over-sexualization of kids today is, I think, the greatest threat to our society. Our kids are being taught about every variation of sexuality. A lot of objectionable content that most parents would say, too young, too soon. The ACLU, Planned Parenthood, many radical organizations out there, our state legislature, they object to the parents being notified and having the right to opt out of a lot of this content.
What we proposed to the Marietta School Board was a policy that was a two-part policy. Number one is it would ensure that this sex ed material would not be taught below 7th grade. The other thing that it would do was give advance notice for any of this material that would be taught outside the context of sex ed. What this policy is about is securing our local family values. It's about us as a community coming together and saying, listen, Sacramento, listen, California Board of Education, you don't get the right to determine what's best for our community. That's what we're for. So we presented this policy to the school board, and really we received a lot of pushback from them. Really what we were hoping was a partnership. We were hoping they would join us to secure the rights for the parents in our community and tell Sacramento we're not good with this stuff in Marietta. We got a flyer about AB 329 that was produced by a friend of mine, Jim Doman of Church United. And there was an action item on there to text to a certain number, and then you would get a response and it would tell you how your legislator voted on this issue. It was right before the elections in 2018 where we had a voters forum at my church, and during that voters forum a member of the Marietta School Board, Chris Tomasian, showed up, and she stood up in the middle of our event and interrupted what was going on. She proceeded to tell my entire congregation that what we were saying was incorrect, that these policies that we were talking about had already been put in place, and we asked her, where is the policy, what policy number? Well, she couldn't answer us. So Netta Higuera of Advocates for Faith and Freedom, she ended up doing additional research and found out that in fact this policy did not exist, and everything that Chris Tomasian had said to my congregation wasn't true. Well, I brought a bunch of people with me and we went to the Marietta School Board meeting, and I called her out on it. I said, you know, you said a lot of things at my church. We found out that they weren't true, and I don't appreciate you misleading my congregation. After going to the Marietta School Board, I was met with a firestorm. I had liberal teachers that were very upset with me, liberal teachers telling me that they have homosexual kids in their class and they think that this stuff should be taught. I found out later on that lady was a kindergarten teacher. And I'm just curious, what kind of conversations is she having with 5-year-olds where she thinks she's determined their sexual preference? I even had one-on-one meeting with Ken Dixon, who's a school board member in Marietta, who assured me that they don't want this stuff to be taught. What we were told in that meeting was, we are not teaching this curriculum. We agree with you. It's a gross curriculum, should never be taught, and assured me that as this stuff comes to a vote, these policies were put to vote, that they would make sure that they voted to ensure the parental advance notice and to ensure the parental right to opt out. All said and done, after the elections, they come to us with their approved policy. Nothing we asked for was in it. In fact, the entire Marietta School Board unanimously voted against our policy. They had the opportunity to secure our rights as parents, and they failed. Chris Tomasian even ran as the pro-parental rights candidate and said that if anybody was going to secure the rights of the parents, it would be her. These are people we elected and trusted to ensure our parental rights, and what did they do? They ran the other way.
This journey started when 76 Democrats and 1 Republican voted for Assembly Bill 329, which was signed into law by Jerry Brown on October 1st, 2015. It was opposed by 32 Republican lawmakers. Planned Parenthood and the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, was responsible for creating the sex education framework based on AB 329. The bill requires school districts to ensure that all pupils receive comprehensive sex health education. Parents started feeling offended by content that literally promotes sex language that encourages children to challenge their parents on sexual conduct topics.
Well, during the voters forum that we did at my church, I had another pastor come up to me and say, "Hey, Tim, I love what you did. Would you please come to my church and do it there?" This particular church was in Moreno Valley here in Southern California. I wanted to speak intelligently about this subject as I called the Moreno Valley Unified School District to find out, what exactly are you using? What curriculums do you have to teach the children sex ed?
We had an inside source who let us know that there were these somewhat secretive but technically public meetings happening at the county level involving our local school districts in Riverside County.
What I found out when I called Moreno Valley Unified School District is they did not have a curriculum they were using yet. But what we were told is there was going to be a meeting coming up where they were going to select the curriculum. So as a result of the legislation passed here in California, AB 329, this comprehensive sexuality education, what we have in California is a handful of curriculums that are approved by the state that can be used. And essentially, any district in the state can select one of these state-approved curriculums, or they can spend an exorbitant amount of money and create their own. Typically what districts do is they select one of these pre-approved curriculum. Now, what we wanted to determine for some of our local communities is, what is it that's going to be chosen for those specific districts? Well, we ended up at a meeting in Riverside County at the Riverside County Board of Education, and what we thought we were walking into was a meeting where they were going to select curriculum for the city of Moreno Valley. That's not what we walked into. We were in a meeting held by the Riverside County Board of Education where they were funding a company called Cardea Services to train all the districts countywide how to cut the parents out. Well, I was not able to show up for this event, and so a lady from a church in Moreno Valley decided she was able to go to this meeting. When she got there, it became very clear that we had thrown her into the lion's den without realizing it. 2 men began to teach this class, and when they started this training, what they said was, we have to teach these things to the children. We have to teach them about gender inclusivity. We have to teach them about trans and non-binary gender identities. We have to teach them these things. And parents are starting to realize that they can opt their kids out of some of this stuff. What we found out was this was not for Moreno Valley. In fact, this was a Riverside County Board of Education meeting where they had brought people from districts all over the county together to train the districts on how to cut the parents out. As the meeting progressed, One of the people in the meetings raised their hand and said, hey, we've got a question. We're really starting to see some opposition on this stuff, so we have to find a way around it. One of the challenges we're facing is parents don't want us to teach our kids about making room for trans and non-binary gender identities. They said, oh, so you've got parents that are coming against you? And they said, no, it's not parents, it's a bunch of religious people. And the question was asked, what district are you with? Lo and behold, they were with Marietta Valley Unified School District. So these two men proceeded to talk to everyone about how to deliberately cut the parents out. They said one of the challenges we're facing is parents don't want us to teach their children about resisting the assumptions of gender identity. After a while, what became clear was these two men who were teaching the class were in fact women who identified as men, working for a company called Cardea Services.
Cardea Services is a for-profit organization that trains on sex ed, and they're a biased corporation. They promote a clear agenda and are trying to bring that to our local schools. The only way for us to find out truly what was happening was to put in a legal demand for the public records.
We did a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, to get all the documents showing everything that went on at this meeting. We ended up with a stack of documents 8 inches thick that we had to go through, and what we found in this will blow your mind.
We wanted to uncover the facts. Our records revealed that the Riverside County Department of Education spent tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars hiring Cardea Services.
Your tax dollars funding this company to train school districts how to cut you, the parent, out.
One of the things that we asked for in our public records request was the PowerPoint presentations that were being presented to our local district officials. What these PowerPoints revealed was unconscionable. It showed a clear agenda to indoctrinate our children. One of the first slides stated the registered participants of this particular October 2018 meeting. And it listed all of our local school districts. It also listed the ACLU of Southern California, Planned Parenthood, Rainbow Pride Youth Alliance, Transgender Community Coalition, and the Transgender Health and Wellness Center. Throughout the presentation, Planned Parenthood is mentioned several times. At least 10 times I came across PowerPoint slides that stated Planned Parenthood was a community partner. It gave the contact information for specific Planned Parenthood individuals, and those Planned Parenthood representatives were at these meetings. Why was Planned Parenthood involved in these presentations? The answer is because they were training our district personnel that students at any age can leave school without parental consent to go get an abortion. They are training our teachers that students are allowed to do this behind their parents' back. They are specifically giving instruction on how to cover this up, and they were training these teachers to mark these kids as an excused absence and basically turn off the notification to parents that their kid was absent from school. They're doing everything they can to make sure that the parents don't find out. From a legal perspective, one of the most disturbing things that I discovered with these PowerPoint slides was that the ACLU, along with Cardea Services, is training our local districts that parents may not opt out of LGBT content that they may find offensive or might want to teach their children at home.
As I looked up Cardea, what we found was that Cardea was an ancient Roman goddess that was associated with hinged Roman doors. And I thought, well, what does that have to do with anything? As I dug even further, what I found was that Cardea, this ancient Roman goddess, was associated with fixing boundaries and marking out sacred spaces. In their mind, the public school system is theirs and the parents have no place in it. They fixed the boundaries, they want you out. Of course, I'm telling you all that this happened. And I know what it's like to say, okay, well, I heard somebody said this has happened, but I want to see this for myself. So here's what we did. We went undercover. You're about to watch some undercover footage of a Riverside County Board of Education public meeting where they are training districts how to cut the parents out. What you're going to see is unbelievable.
Because there's a lot. They're going to talk about opt-in, opt-out today. So, that, and also the rights of students for leaving the campus to have some medical attention concerning certainly pregnancies. So, but I think it's other things too. Because I don't know the rules too. That's all new to me. My name is Mike Marty. I'm the Executive Director of Instructional Services. So, of course, this is a health-focused area, so it falls under instructional services. We've been very fortunate to partner with Cardea Services. They have a grant to provide these kinds of networks throughout California. It's all about the ed code and the facts, so we realize there's some perspectives, but it is, the ed code is pretty clear that it's about the facts and not about something. And so they try to do that. There's some, today I think there's going to be some law that's going to be talked about, so that'll be clear, they tend to be always very clear on the law.
Regardless of how old the student is, they can walk into a doctor's office and consent to these services without parental consent. Those services are pregnancy and prenatal care, contraception and emergency contraception, abortion, and so for these, there's no parental notification. I think a good way to think about all of these are just services that California has decided are so important that we're going to allow minors to be able to go into a doctor's office and consent to these services because they're just that important and students really need to be able to access them. And they're very sensitive in terms of a lot of times students don't want to talk to their parents or guardians about these kinds of issues.
But it's those who can't, right, who are in dangerous situations, who are going to have their college tuition taken away, who are maybe experiencing abuse at home, right, that need to have that barrier cleared for them. If a 16-year-old is having sex with another 16-year-old, which we all know happens, right? Technically, both of those people can be prosecuted under California law because there's no Romeo and Juliet exemption. But whether you are bound to then report those things that are technically crimes is actually usually a no. So it's a little complicated.
Young people have the right to leave school to seek confidential medical services without the consent or notification of their parents or guardians. And I think the key thing to remember here is that when you're thinking about confidential medical release, the right belongs to the young person. So it doesn't belong to the parent, it doesn't belong to the school. The right lies with the young person. The most important piece of this is that schools cannot share this information with parents or guardians. Also, no parent call. So a teacher or the attendance office can't call home and say so-and-so was out at, the doctor's office receiving X. Did you know about this? Cannot do that. Are there any questions on this piece? I know this piece off. Yeah. Yeah, there is. Yes.
So are they considered absent?
So I think, and Ruth will correct me if I'm wrong, I think it qualifies as like an excused absence, the same way that if a parent...
Well, because once you're absent, they call, automatically.
Right, so I think, again, Ruth will chime in if I'm incorrect, but I think what needs to happen then is the school must develop a policy so that doesn't happen.
When it comes to online attendance tracking, it's a little trickier because schools, as everyone in this room knows, have to report attendance, right?
The business, because attendance is financial.
Yeah, if you say medical, that's actually a violation of the student's privacy rights. If you say unexcused absence and penalize them, that's a violation of the law. So what the heck are you supposed to do? Some districts do things like they'll say, oh, the student was with an administrator at this time, and that administrator, they won't answer further questions. It's a little tricky though, which is why it's kind of more of an art than a science, and there are a few different ways to do it, right? It can't say the student was in class just like every other day, right? Because that's not true to the law for reimbursement reasons, which is why we think kind of the best option is something that is amorphous, doesn't disclose that that person was off campus having a medical appointment. But saying it's an excused absence does not directly violate the law.
But it's still attendance tracking.
It is. So this is you need to contend with the online attendance tracking. So we have gender identity, which is a spectrum. somebody can feel that they are a male, a man, a boy, or also other genders. And so I think the important thing to note here is that gender, I would say gender is a social construct, but what is easiest is that gender is not a binary, right? We don't have like male, female, full stop. There are people who identify as non-binary. There are people who identify as genderqueer. There are a bunch of genders. Not only are gender identity and gender expression non-binary, but really kind of quote-unquote biological sex is not binary either, right? Then we have who are you physically attracted to? Also can be a spectrum, right? Is anyone familiar with Kinsey, the Kinsey scale? There's you know, kind of straight and queer, and then like everything in between. So you can be physically attracted to women, men, folks of other genders. And then emotional attraction is also separate from physical attraction. So this is just all to show that it is a kind of complex, rich world of identities that we are talking about when we say LGBTQ. So we have two-spirit, bigender, male to female, female to male, transsexuals, even though that term has typically been phased out because it was kind of medicalized and stigmatized, but you still might hear it. Masculine women, feminine men, androgynous persons, transvestite, third gender, drag, cross-dressers, genderqueers, intergender, agendered. Again, another kind of complicated umbrella. Trans does not mean one particular thing. LGBTQ inclusivity and CHIA opt-out. So all comprehensive sex ed and HIV prevention, instruction and materials in grades K through 12. So no matter where you teach sex ed, no matter whether you call it puberty education, family life education, comprehensive sex ed, doesn't matter if you're teaching 5th graders or 12th graders. All of that has to be inclusive of LGBTQ individuals, right? So this is not a content requirement, it's more of a tone requirement. Instruction must affirmatively recognize that people have different sexual orientations and must be inclusive of same-sex relationships. We already covered this. And instruction has to teach students about gender, gender expression, gender identity, and explore the harm of negative gender stereotypes. It is not only bias-free, but it is affirmatively inclusive of those folks and relationships. Schools may not facilitate a selective opt-out just of the queer stuff, just of the LGBTQ stuff in sexual health education. We've heard a lot of parents, unfortunately, who say, I really want my kid to learn sex ed. It's important. However, none of the gay stuff. They can't do that. So schools may not facilitate the selective opt-out of lessons that are focused on LGBTQ content by parents or guardians whose students are otherwise in the classroom for other sex ed instruction. Practically, it should be impossible. Because the idea with CHIA is that LGBTQ people and relationships are interwoven into the entire curriculum, right? It's not like on day 3 you learn about queer people and everything else is straight people. That's not how it works, right? And so opting out just of the LGBTQ stuff is illegal and should be also impossible.
California parents and teachers have been protesting what they call the sexually explicit and dangerous agenda of the proposed statewide health education curriculum. Statists and tyrants have long known that the secret to transforming culture, society, and government lies with the children. Vladimir Lenin said, "Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the whole world." I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland at a time when civics occupied a significant portion of elementary school curriculum. We learned about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, memorized the preamble. We took field trips to the locations where the foundational history of this country was carved out. And we learned the price that many of those founders paid in order to provide us with the freedom and liberty that we as Americans enjoy today and have for generations. Parents need to remind the state officials that the family remains the foundational civil institution upon which society is built. There are millions of Californians who do not consent to the curriculums calculated to undermine values, the faith, and the authority of parents.
As a pastor, a major concern I have with all of this is that there's this continual bringing up of the gender ideology, that there's more than two genders, there's an infinite amount of genders. And at its very roots, that is an occultic practice. And so what we have is an occultic practice, a religion that the state is now forcing upon our families. It is a state forcing an ideology and indoctrinating its people into this weird spiritual movement across California. I go all over the state now talking to churches and church leaders and trying to help engage them in the culture and what's going on. And quite frankly, really what I'm met with most of the time is, no, there's no way that's happening in our community. And the fact is, it is. Hey, we can be effective. We can have our voice be heard.